Hi, I'm Leap. I use he, him.
I'm Jerika. I use she, her.
I'm Air. I use he, him. And this is Insight Check, where we delve into the dungeon of your bad decisions to retrieve the treasure of wisdom.
Now, we gave you a pretty hard time about this intro.
You really did. You really did. I was listening to it in the car on the way home from work, and I was like, man, what's the word? Superposition, something, a word. And
Super Mario.
Wow, I'm doing it while I'm trying to explain the thing that I did. This is amazing.
I would say it was maybe a Freudian slip.
Yeah, perhaps. Yes,
where you mean one thing, but you talk about your mother? Is that
it? Where we delve into the dungeons of your bad mothers and retrieve the treasure.
That's one bad mother.
Stay out of my mom's dungeon, Air. Stay out of there. Listen, man, it's weird. It is good to talk with you all. It feels like a generation has passed since I've gotten to be on the pod with you guys. It's been a while.
Bees have lived and died.
Oh my God, that's true.
Will they live again?
Only time will tell. Who knows?
It's true. You didn't specify species, so
that's true. You
generation.
Didn't specify species. They're honeybees, though. They're like classic. They're that classic fuzz. For everyone who doesn't know, that's a small folk reference, which you can find on YouTube if you don't know that already. But you're all my friends, and you know that already. So
Insight Check YouTube channel.
Yeah. But this is the time of the pod where we generally do a dungeon crawl, where we talk about dungeon crawl. When we talk about like the things that have been going on with us or with Dungeons and Dragons or with both. And what have you guys been up to in D&D? Like, I've been living in a summer hole for a while.
So I've been aggrandizing my accoutrements, my D&D stuff.
Ooh.
So I recently purchased a DM screen.
Oh.
It's my first one that's not made out of Amazon boxes.
Nice.
And or file folders. So I got TWGS.
So what is on... Well, actually, this is interesting. What is behind the curtain of the DM screen? For those of you who don't...
We'll talk about that later.
But like, there's stuff and rules on the back of these things, right? Like, I've never
So
owned one.
I got a TWGS, which is the world's greatest screen, TM. And it is completely customizable. Mine has 4 landscape sections. And each side of each section has pockets for 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper.
Oh, that's
and you can actually, and then there's plastic on the outside, so you could actually take like a dry erase and like draw on it if you wanted to, but that's a lot of work. Yeah, so I'm quite happy with my purchase. But that's not the important thing I wanted to talk about. The important thing is a fabulous initiative tracker 3D print file that I've been using with my TWGS. TM. So that was a noise. Okay, great.
Sorry.
So Thingiverse is a repository of many a 3D print that people have made and put up. And there is a great maker. His name is Dr. Lefonque, DRLEFONQUE, Lefonque.
Oh my God, that's the best name.
He has a dinosaur. With a suit icon. It's pretty cool. His name online is Dino Costa. I think I don't know. It's
this
cool.
person's getting better. Oh my God.
Or her. Or they.
them.
I don't know. But anyway, so there is a 3D model called D&D Initiative Tracker. It's a little like clip. It's like more exciting than a clothespin, but kind of that vibe. And there's a full size initiative tracker and then a skinny one, a half size. So I've been using the half size, and the best thing about it is it like sits like perfectly on my TWGS.
Oh, that's dope. That's so
Yeah.
good. Lefonk. I can't.
Lefonk, right?
Lefonk.
But he's a doctor, or she, or they.
Now,
Bonk.
is
Say
it like
shonk.
New frond.
medical doctor? Like what kind of?
It's just DR at the beginning,
DR?
so who knows?
The mystery.
I see no, credentials anywhere, but they make a good initiative tracker for sure.
Oh my goodness. I love every minute of this. That makes me insanely happy. Oh God. Okay, cool. Air, you said you had a quick one. What's your quick delve, my man?
Well, yeah, I was thinking about, so in our Powered by the Apocalypse Star Trek game that we've been playing, one of the things, it's roughly based on Dungeon World, which is itself based on Apocalypse World. But one of the things they've been doing is they adopted kind of a 5e style advantage-disadvantage system.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so we've been using that, and I like it, and it got me thinking, I wonder if the creators of Dungeon World, who play and run it constantly, and it's been out for a number of years now, have any hacks to it that they've used so often and incorporated into their own games that they maybe thought about putting those together to create a second edition. So I added Adam Coble and Sage Latora, who are the creators, and I got a little fanboy when Sage actually replied and said that he does in fact have some things that he would love to get into the game, but just he needs to find the time with Adam, so it's going to keep it under wraps for now. But I was like, ooh, the guy I think is cool replied A and B, there might be a second edition of Dungeon World. So I was very excited.
Nice.
That's dope. That's really, really cool. Dungeon World sounds amazing. Every time you talk about it, it sounds like a buttload of fun. And
I think it would work like just super well for small folk. Actually, we should chat one day.
We should chat one day. Oh my God. Okay. Sorry, I just freaked out. But actually, this leads really well into my first one. Jay, who is our friend on the pod, who is editing what you are listening to right now, my good
He
listener.
edited it before. He's already finished it.
Oh yes, this
Yeah.
Speak to you from the past.
Ooh, watch out for the mustard.
Leap is definitely the best for crazy noises.
Coming from you, Jerika, this is a high compliment. I'm going to take it, and I'm really thankful. But anyways, Jay ran a small folk game for just a few of us. He was really nice and was like, Leap, I want you to play small folk. I got an idea. When are you free? And it finally happened over the summer. And it was really cool because both he and I were the ones who kind of sat down to hash this thing together, to see someone else's take on what has been entirely a headcanon in my own brain, but I know is a headcanon in his own brain too, right? Like him and I have had conversations on and off. It's like, hey, what do you think of this? Or like we were talking about holidays and seasons within the Valley like months ago now, but it was just cool to like see what he's been thinking about, see how he runs a game, and then be the one to die in the game was wonderful. Like I had like full-blown player death. I died for real. He did the thing that I want DMs to always do, is like have the monster hit me when I am like down on the ground. And then I rolled under the one single time and I was like dead. And it was incredible. I don't know why I'm so glorifying like my own player death, but like it just never happens in any games that I've played with. And so it was just, I don't know, a really fun moment and really, really cool. Jay, thanks for running that game. It was really, really cool.
The fact that I have yet to die I play with Jay as my DM a lot, and I have not died. In fact, my current character has disadvantage on death saves and is still yet to die. Yeah.
Oh my
One of
God.
our characters died, and we decided that we would just run without a healer. So we literally have, aside from the occasional healing potion, we ain't got nothing if someone goes down.
Wow.
So in the first combat, a drunk phytologist character died. We made a deal with some NPCs, and part of the expense was taking my luck away.
Whoa.
Yes, indeed.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So I have been down making death saves at disadvantage, and somehow my good dumb orc stab boy is still alive.
I have some beef with your orc stab boy.
Why is that?
Honestly.
What is the beef? Where's the beef?
Where's the beef?
Well, I can't tell you with that voice. I don't know. Like, we had solved the mystery, and then you played your orc boy very well and dumb.
Very well and done.
And it made me very angry.
Yeah, you and Drunk Phytologist were not happy with me.
You stabbed our enemy, our frenemy.
Our frenemy.
Our enemy who would soon be our friend because they were ill and they weren't in their right mind.
I'm sorry.
No, it is what it is.
I mean, he did eventually acquiesce later after being reamed out for doing the stab. So
it's true. And additionally, there were some words about playing to not maximized abilities, and some words about not maximize abilities themselves in our Discord, and we can get into that later.
Ooh, yeah.
For sure. But yeah, I was like, Air plays that Korg so well. It makes me angry.
I respect it, but it makes my game real tough sometimes.
I disagree with you.
That's how you get points with Jay. So, player respects player for sure.
You don't hate the player, you hate the game, right? Is that the deal?
We love the game.
No, for sure.
I hate hurting my friends. That's what I hate.
We hate the PC. Yeah.
That's incredible. Our good listeners, today we were talking about, we were just having a conversation before we got online, and we were talking about that, like what goes on beyond the DM screen. Like if you are a player in a game, you are seeing a very specific version of the plans of...
well, it's the sort of culmination of everyone's input.
Yeah.
So at the table, you're seeing what the DM is offering as a setting and how the players are reacting to that. And before that sort of synthesis happens, I believe most DMs have some idea of how they think things are going to go or what they expect and the scenarios that might come out of that. But I think that, from what I've seen, I think that players don't necessarily know how much they are affecting the world as they are going through it, because they see sort of the game as it's being made, as they are sort of interacting with it. And I think it might actually... we're just jumping right into it. Hi, everybody. But I think it might actually be somewhat useful to let the players know how much they are affecting the world and the expectations of the DM at some point by having some sort of debrief or whatever after games. I think it's an interesting idea. I know I tend to sort of have a scenario and then I sort of improvise the rest of it. And I've learned that I tend to use animals to improvise. So, in a game I've played recently, I threw an almirage at my players. So that was like the way that I was trying to get them to like get involved in the world.
Yeah.
But that wasn't something I had planned. And, the plan was something entirely different, obviously. But, what do you think, fellow co-hosts? Do you think that players don't know how much they are affecting the world they're playing in because they don't know what the plan was originally?
See, I was just thinking about that while you were talking. It's hard to it's hard to have that discussion with players. Like, I like the debrief idea. And my challenge is, and one of the challenges I think with that is that like you might, like in a lot of my games, like the things that they might still happen, right? Or like, oh, well, this happened, like this still might go on, or like I was thinking that you guys would get to here by now. But if there's still that chance of getting to like that spot, you don't want to give anything away, right? But I like the idea of telling players their impact right? And seeing showing players and being like, this is what is cool that happened. There's no way that would have happened before without you.
Yeah,
and like
exactly.
The example that comes to mind immediately, Jerika, is like when before Small Folk was a stream and we were just playing in like our Discord, and I was giving the description of the gloaming, right? I was telling you all about you and the other players about like the different activities that you could find. And I just mentioned that there were the bats playing the cards, and there was like a Shellfolk snail was walking away, and the bats seemed really excited. And you were like, I'm going to go talk to that snail.
I want to go talk to that snail, though.
I want to get in on that.
I still remember that snail's name, though.
Okay, tell me what's the snail's name then? I love you. Amazing. That makes me insanely happy. But like that was a moment that like in that description, like as the DM, I had all of my activities planned out. So like that game, like later I think we're going to talk about in the rails versus like sandboxy kind of things. The gloaming, like that event was a bit of a sandbox, right? Like I kind of set the parameters of what people could do and had a general understanding of like what those things how those might work within those, and then like events that could come up, but it was just going to be it, right? But then in my description of those things, you picked something that was just like, it was
a random aside,
right? Like it was just something that while I was imagining it in my head, in my description, I imagined the snail walking away from the table, but that was the thing that stuck with you. But that made the game better, right? Like it made a whole other scene in the game that wouldn't exist. And then now that I'm getting to run it again, or I have run it again, and I'm like writing it out as something that people might play, that snail and that corn is in the game, right? Like, so
totally.
So I think that that's being able to point out to people at the end of the game to be like, hey, so this was rad, and here's why I loved it, because in no way was that a part of the plan.
And I thought it was really interesting producing for the sort of table two.
Yeah. Table two.
That went through the gloaming, that were at the gloaming, basically, because they were poking at other things. And so even though in the game you ran for my group, we didn't necessarily get to all the stuff. We didn't necessarily go down in the cellar.
Yeah.
But so I got to see all this other stuff that was going on too. And I thought it was really cool.
And like, I'm going to have to call out Dunami for a minute in like the best way, because like his character was like the number one example of how a character can change a game, because like he wanted to play and he wanted to be a badger, and he's like, I want to bust out of the earth. And I was like, well, that's going to change the game in an incredible way that I had no plan of, and that's going to be the game now, right? Like,
totally.
Yeah.
In what, the way I approach this usually as a player is I try to come up with a backstory that's somewhat influential and has some sort of game-changing aspect, if you will. Like it's a backstory that cannot be denied somehow.
I like that. Yeah.
No one puts backstory in a corner.
Exactly. But at the same time, I think maybe I'm a little too heavy-handed, because I'm sure there are decisions that I'm making at the table that are changing the way the DM is looking at the world, or the limits, pushing the limits of what is known, the known universe, that I'm not necessarily privy to, because first of all, a lot of DMs don't want to admit that maybe they haven't planned out the entire world, atom by atom.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that to some extent it would be nice to know exactly what you said, like this wouldn't exist if you hadn't done this, or, this whole thing was definitely like an inspiration of this other thing that you said over here. So, and that sort of collaboration is not necessarily evident all the time. Anyway.
Well, I was going to say there's this kind of cultural within like the D&D wider culture as it is, of the DM almost being like a stage magician. There's this sense of like it, and like I even see like, you know, like greatest DMs we have on, like Matthew Mercer. Whenever they do something, his answer is, "You don't know." And, you know, they will ask him, "Did you have this prepared? Did you have this ready? Did you know we were going to do this? Did you just pull that out of your ass?" And he's like, "You don't know." Because like when you're just playing your game for your players, having that sense of mystique and whatnot is great. But when you become someone who is looked to as, you know, an example of great DMing, that can be somewhat problematic, that mystique or whatever, because you really wanted to get into the headspace and the thought process of someone like that to figure out what they're doing. One of the greatest kudos I can give to our DMJ is that he never has any problem debriefing with us after a session about why he did. Like, I asked him another thing. We had a combat encounter in our game, and I was absolutely certain that he was kind of leading us down the garden path and we were always going to end up at that fight, and he was just going to spin it narratively, which I'm fine with. I think that getting to your destination, if the destination is prefab, but you had the choice of how you got there, I think that still allows for autonomy and a narrative voice for the players. But we can get into the whole railroading versus sandbox conversation.
Indeed. And depending on which path you take, you might have a different disposition when you get to the final battle.
Absolutely. But when Jay was like, no, like, and then he pointed out a plot point, which of course I missed because I'm obtuse when it comes to paying attention to these things. But and when he said it, he was like, well, no, they were logging that area. And that meant that this entire thing wouldn't make sense. These enemies, or well, this encounter wouldn't have even been in an area that wasn't being logged, because that's why they were there in the first place. They were looking to avenge this folly foist upon the forest.
Well done.
Yeah.
So, and I hadn't even thought of that, but yeah, he's right. That wouldn't have made sense. And the fact that he had all of that thought process in there, and that's why he said, "I'm so happy you went this way because I got to do this thing." And I was like, well, weren't we always going to do this thing? No, X, Y, and Z. So there is that level of connecting dots and world building behind the scenes that we don't even see. But if you're a DM, it really behooves, if you want to inspire your players to one day sit behind the screen and weave their own tales, to really demystify that process for them.
Yeah, definitely.
I also think that that if you like I like when players jump in and poke at things. I think it makes for an interesting game. I think it depends on the kind of DM that you are. It turns out, are all DMs who enjoy the improvisational aspect of the game. And so if you're not that kind of person, like if you are a person who this is a stressor or whatever, then this might not be something you like. But I like players who do that because it makes things fun and interesting for me as well. And so I think that if you highlight the ways that people change the game, you're going to encourage that kind of behavior in your players as well, right? And so it will continue to make for a more dynamic game, right? Like it won't be like the planning. I don't know, like I guess we should talk about planning a little bit. Jerika, you told us how you planned already a little bit. But
I like to take it session by session. So look at the lay of the land at the end of whatever session you played and see whatever you're planning in the future could be sort of hooked into what has occurred, to make it maybe feel like, again, that players are kind of affecting the world. So maybe they chose to go left instead of right. Well, maybe at the end of left, there is now something they don't have to get to right.
Yeah, totally.
They don't have to get all the way to right to advance the plot. Maybe the plot can be advanced from left.
For sure.
In a new and exciting way that maybe the DM didn't consider before.
Totally, which is different than how other people might, like if other people have like a start, middle, and end of their adventure already planned out, then that flexibility might be a little bit more difficult to build, or there might be, like Air was saying, a little bit of that like renegotiation to the end goal, right? Like, so that's that's just a different and interesting way of running, which I think has like a lot of value and makes for a really interesting game. Air, how about you? Like when you DM, if you're either DMing a one shot or like something that will expand over a couple sessions, like how do you go about it?
So for a one shot, I have done ones that were super, super elaborately spelt out, but that was normally for the thought that I would potentially put this forward as something. The first one shot I ran for some of the folks in the ICP community and I guess the C team community, because we all kind of met through that particular D&D stream. The stream was very, very plotted out and planned out. Because I had thought of maybe turning it into like a DM's Guild product, but then, life got in the way. But more recently when I'm running a one shot, and I know I normally have about 2 to 2.5 hours, I have a much looser sense of like, I'm going to have an intro session where we can introduce characters and maybe give them an NPC to kind of get them, give them a little exposition to kind of get them started in a direction, puzzle, combat encounter, or kind of investigation, RPing with someone, trying to plot that kind of stuff out, but keep it a little bit looser and generally going for time. I do want to say that, kind of just looping back to the whole, like the players that prod the world to kind of see where the boundaries are. I think this is the reason that D&D is an art and not a science, in that there is a juxtaposition between character autonomy and honoring the social contract of the that you're making with the DM. Because obviously they've prepared something, they've got a character who they're doing a funny voice for, saying, I can't wait till we get to X. And if their first thought is, I kill him, take all his stuff, and we go the exact direct opposite direction of X, like, that's not prodding anymore. That's saying, fuck you, DM.
Yeah, pretty much.
I'm going to play my adventure. And, but where's that line? Because I definitely do enjoy prodding. I enjoy when people kind of take a novel approach to something. Or so how much arbitration there is around the boundaries of that.
Yeah, there's a difference between creativity and assholery.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this with the absolute love that if my friends are listening, I love you. And this was a big learning experience for me as a DM, because it was the first time I DM'd. I wanted to run a game for my friends before I did all of the small folk stuff, and like started DMing for my school. I made like a seafaring kind of campaign, like piratey. We hadn't even left the main town yet, and basically they just, at every opportunity they could to sidetrack me, they sidetracked me. Eventually they got a massive ship, way bigger than they should have. I gave it what I thought was a really cool name. It was called the Empire's Regret. And they decided to name it after my dog's butthole. They were like, no, we're not gonna. You know what? We're gonna take this ship. We're not gonna listen to any of your NPCs, and we're gonna call it Carl's Butthole. That's what we're gonna call your ship now.
Oh my gosh.
And it's become a joke, and it's fine, and it's hilarious now. And I might one shot them a campaign where they are going around on Carl's Butthole to a place called Boar Island at some point in time. But
how many boars will there be? How many feral hogs will there be?
This is literally like this. I tweeted about this a little bit, but like there was a moment where we were sitting in I was planning a session Wednesday. We play on Wednesdays. And then one of my players was like, you know what my guy really wants to do? I want to go to Boar Island. We hadn't talked about Boar Island at all. This was like this is 2 years ago, before the feral hog meme had begun. And so I spent an afternoon.
There was a feral hog meme?
Oh,
Jerika. I missed that one, I think.
Oh, Jerika.
It's actually been my favorite memery that I've ever been a part of.
Oh, boy.
It is been anywho. He came up with this idea. My friends went bananas for it. I planned it, and then he couldn't show up for the game. He just like, he couldn't be there. But I think to answer your question, Eric, there's like poking at something at that, like, I think it's an intent, and it's also a willingness to explore something that's been described, right? Or like within the frame of reference that you've been given, right? And being like, okay, well, you said that there's like I passed by a shop, like what's in that shop? Like depending on the person, that might be a bit of a stretch. Like someone might be like, oh, well, you know what, that shop's locked. And then that's the sign of being like, okay, that was just like window dressing, right? But then another DM might be like, oh, well, actually, and can either have that already planned out or will just run with it. I think the willingness to be playful and also understand that you might just get a polite no is also kind of fits that framework, you know?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Or you might get the same answer to a question that you ask twice. I feel like that's usually how my no comes.
Yeah. That's fair. Yeah.
The politest no is the double answer. Yeah, That's sweet.
You're not sure.
Still not sure.
Yeah.
Still don't know, man. I don't know.
No, it's still locked.
Yeah.
Sorry.
The furbolg remains difficult to read. He's inscrutable, this guy.
Gosh, even though you rolled, a 5 and then a 20, still hard to tell.
Yeah. And then hopefully you have the players who understand that, right? Because then depending on the people that you have, you might tumble into that, well, like that rule of what a 20 represents versus hopefully then people will be like, okay, cool. Let's move on. Let's go do something else, right? I've reached the boundary of what is acceptable, and let's go play in our imaginary world in another spot, right?
Yes, indeed.
I love the idea of the player that pushes for a check and then just the answer is the polite no of like natural 20 on my insight check. You think this furbolg is the greatest thespian of his generation and that his face betrays no emotion save a seething contempt for your staring.
Indeed.
You still got nothing, buddy. I'm sorry. It's still a furbolg. Yeah. So, Air, you were saying you've done that for one shots, right? Like you have, what about for something a little bit long term, right? Something that'll go beyond one or two sessions.
Jerika's advice is the best one, which is you got to get the lay of the land as you go, because you are laying down track as the train is moving down it. So at the end of a session,
if there's a DM that doesn't do that,
I don't know how
tell me about it.
Yeah, I don't know how you could, like, because you're constantly recontextualizing things as it goes. Like when we played our little dungeon world, we had a mini arc, but I was still prepping every session after the last session, trying to figure out how I was going to work in. Like, I wanted to have a little bit of everyone's backstory. Each session was essentially a way to highlight something from each of the backstories that was given to me from the characters. And so at the end of it, I was like, okay, well, I guess they're staying at this inn, so I need to somehow foreshadow that this character from this person's backstory is kicking around looking for them. I guess we'll do that at the end then, like that kind of thing. Yeah, you're constantly, and that's kind of where I think world building and actually delivering the game kind of comes into play, is depending on the degree of granularity in your world building, it gives you a lot of context to kind of shape the narrative as you're building it. So you can kind of be like, well, yes, I know that I want to eventually have them have a big conflict with this party in this part of the world. How do I get it there? And knowing all the lands and kingdoms and peoples and whatnot along the way between where they are and there allows you to take the end of session 13 or wherever they are and figure out ways to gently nudge them in that direction.
Yeah, that makes a bunch of sense. I'm learning, I'm running 3 games, kind of, the 2 table games of Small Folk, and then there's the third there's like a community game, Table 3, which is offline. We've played twice, and it's been like the most amount of time has spanned between those two tables. So there's been like different players coming in and out. And I am learning that I prefer setting up a sandbox versus giving like a very specific path. Like Table 1's game, it's not a railroad, but it's a tunnel. It's been in a tunnel for a real long time, and I didn't mean it to be a really long time. They've been doing interesting things, and I've been learning that it's also a pacing thing that I've done, whether I meant to or not, right? Like if I wanted to, I could have just within the first 20 minutes of day 1 do like, okay, well, this is what happens. You pass 3 days in a tunnel and here you are. But there was like things that I had planned or options that they could do that they kind of bid at, or I presented to them and they were polite enough to be like, yeah, let's do that. And, or they had to. But it's been like this single tunnel, and just kind of by the nature of the adventure, it will lead up into a dungeon. Like that's just kind of the quest that they've kind of been, that the storyline that I created, because it was kind of it was the second story that I actually made, because the first one was the Gloaming. And the Gloaming, like I said, is Table 2, and it's much more sandboxy. There's just like a big space with a lot of stuff going on, and they get to just like pick and interact at that stuff. And then it's up to me to decide if the things happening in the game by their decision alone is the game itself, or does something interrupt those activities, right? So like, I don't think this is too spoilery, but I'm sorry if you haven't watched anything of this, but like they're doing the normal fair events, and then an encounter happens out of nowhere, right? And so that I think is a little bit more what I like, because it feels more like the players have more room to explore and make their own choices.
I think that the most mature players will be able to sort of find their own enjoyment in the game in any scenario, or in many scenarios.
Yes.
They will either, find interest in their own sort of ruminations, or interacting with the world, or learning something new about the world, or discovering something, or defeating something new that they've never defeated before. So I think that it's when you have players that are impatient, or again trying to push for one thing or the other, I think it's sort of a sign of immaturity.
I think that's probably the single greatest piece of advice you could give to a new player to D&D is try to be as invested in everyone else's character and all the characters you're meeting at the table as you are in your own.
Yeah.
Because the first time out, you're going to be real excited, and you're going to write a Tolstoy novel's worth of backstory, and you're going to meticulously pick every single little feature and spell. and you need to appreciate the fact that the people around that table are feeling the same way about the person they're inhabiting for 2 hours a week while eating Doritos or whatever. Like, and that builds an esprit de corps of just like so much excitement when you are happy to see another person's backstory play out, and you get that what feeling. Like Jerika's character 2 sessions ago, I think now, revealed that they are actually a cat that has taken on tiefling form, and we were all like, what? Like,
I told you they were my babies.
Yes,
I told you they were.
The flock of familiar spell that summons tiny kittens is actually her literal kitten.
Oh my god, that's so
baby.
good.
Her dead baby. It's actually kind of dark and sad.
That's so sad.
Yeah, it's one of them tragic facts.
Yes.
Oh no.
But that we were super excited, and Matt Will Jackson is playing a dragon. Draconic bloodline sorcerer, who's trying to hide it. And so, constantly.
I think he's found his fun in not revealing any information about that, especially to people who really want to know about it.
Yeah. we say people, we mean burn, but we say
Burn.
people.
Yeah.
But yes, that is the best advice you can get from a player perspective. Jerika, nail, head, bam, just hit it.
And I think some people find their interest in playing their character in playing to their faults.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we want to get into the low ability score discussion that was had in chat.
Yes, basically this episode
this.
is just everything that's been going on in our Discord. We're just going to talk to you about
our
it.
Brains.
Our brains. Mm-hmm. It was a classic Your DMJ hot take. He was saying that an 11 Shaw bard wouldn't even want him at the table. They're a detriment to their party. And everyone's like, but what if that's their character? What if they want to play a bumbling bard? What if they want to play a bard who's not charming? Play against type. And you got the mechanics versus the, role playing and story elements of it. What do we all think, folks? What is our thoughts on characters?
Well, if you're gonna play to your low int, and what's Korg's int score?
6.
6, right?
Yeah.
So that's pretty darn low.
Oh man, yeah.
I wouldn't want to go any lower than that. But it's a choice to be made. But I think at some point you are gonna start running into parts where it's not fun. But if it's a conscious choice you're making, I think that's different than not realizing what it's doing to your character. So, like, if you play a negative con fighter, well, that's going to affect maybe your tanking abilities. And so if you're planning on tanking, maybe not.
This plays into a little bit of like a combination of optimized stats for a character, or at least strong stats where you need them for a character versus like personality traits and role playing, right? Because I think if you had a character whose main stat was a 0 modifier, then if the party's like, yeah, man, do your thing and you're just going to be underpowered, right? And so, but if you're fine with that and you're just here along for the game, then sure. But that will change the game, right? If you have if you have a fighter with no con, that fighter is going to die a lot. Or if you have a fighter that has no strength, or a sorcerer that doesn't have a good charisma stat, then their damage isn't going to be very good, and your battles are going to be harder. That might become a part of your game, and if everyone is on board with that, then that's cool. But if it's you have 5 people at the table, 4 of them have 17s or 18s in that stat that they absolutely need, and you're walking in with a 12, then
I think the problem comes along when you start making it about you and your low stat, right?
Yeah.
If you can play it in a way that everyone's having fun and it's not super disruptive or problematic, then it's fine. But if it's oh, woe is me, I rolled a 1 for my hit points this level and now I don't have any new hit points. Boo-hoo, 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 pity me. Then it's problematic.
Yeah. And I think
people are well, that's a choice that you made.
And I think the reverse side for that, when it comes to a role-playing standpoint too, is if you're someone who does really enjoy playing the flaws of your character. So int is a great one, right? If your character's just super duper dumb, and so every time they get into something, they muck it up, and everyone has to figure out the problem that you made. If that's happening every single time, then you're putting your character at the center of a group game all the time, right? And then that could become a challenge for the players around you. Like that might just be not as much fun for everyone unless that's like a trope that people enjoy, and that becomes like the running joke of the thing, right?
Indeed. Yep.
I think it can also, like, I was saying that the DM can kind of make adjustments for this, and I do, with the caveat that like the DM is already doing a lot of work, so making more work for them by having to adjust a combat encounter around,
Right, then they're making it about them, and the characters, the players making it about that character, and that's not great. I think the best and first thing that the DM can do is try to explain why that choice might be not great.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason it works for Korg, if you want to do the play into a low stat thing, it's like pick a stat that's not going to be something that is really important to the efficacy of your character. Like Korg is very much a martially focused, big dumb fighter type. So an int isn't really ever going to be something, but playing a low int wizard would be a much more different thing. You're now haranguing yourself in a mechanical way on something your character is kind of expected to be good at. Like if you want a low int, maybe wizard isn't the way you want to go. Like,
no,
just be a dumb sorcerer.
But like the thing
it's
that
always an option.
Always, Jim Dark Magic is here for a reason. But I think playing a low, like a quirk that like comes up every so often can be like a fun moment, as long as it only comes up every so often, right? I'm playing I am playing a goblin warlock. So he's not optimized, but that's fine. Like it's still okay. But like his int is really, really low. But just like hearing you talk about like what you're saying, Air, is like maybe he thinks he's really strong because he's a goblin, and they're like and it's just like something like this. So he gets himself not into dangerous situations, but dumb situations, right? Like he tries to arm wrestle people saying he's like super duper strong, but his strength is super low, right? And and so he always loses, or he tries to bash down a door and busts his hand, right? Like nothing that takes front and center all the time, because anyone who's front and center all the time, it isn't fun for everybody else, and nothing that is going to wreck the night of anybody, right? But just like a fun little quirk that someone can have every so often. That's a fun thing to do.
I almost want to say that like the stats matter insofar. Like I think a lot of people think that, okay, I'm playing a bard, but I don't want to be like a charismatic bard. I don't want to be a stereotypical, like, rock star, super suave, just a hot and sexy bard. So I'm going to dump my chaw. I'm going to have a really low chaw to reflect that. But I think what needs to be understood is that number can be whatever you want. How the narrative is spun around it is important. So you can have a shy bard with a super high chaw, and the reason it works is because people find their humility so endearing. People find like, oh my God, a down-to-earth bard. What a breath of fresh air. I'm going to do whatever you want. You drink for free. Like every other loot swinging, asshole that walks into this place thinks they're God's gift to music and wine, women, and so on. Thank God you just want to sit there, play your music, and then shuffle off for the night. Here's double your money. Like, the numbers are there to kind of fill in the mechanics, but the way that gets spun out narratively doesn't have to be reflective of those numbers per se. It works even when it works in spite of itself.
Mm-hmm. Some of this, I think, is discovered in those first few sessions at the table, right? Like some of it, I think I really believe in a game zero. So like, which is weird to say because, and players, I'm sorry, like I like the idea of game zero. I haven't run many game zeros now that I think about it, aside from like chats in Discords. But like if you sit down and talk to people about like, well, this is the character that I'm thinking, and this is what I'm thinking they'll be like, then people will either know that it's coming or can offer suggestions, or then like it's just a little bit more collaborative that way, right? So, like people can buy into that humble bard idea, or like, or someone can offer a suggestion if you're having that problem of like, I want to be a bard, but I don't want to be the rock star. Like, what do you guys think? Right? Like, it depends on the kind of game that you're in or the culture of your table, I guess.
Absolutely. You can have a dumb wizard. I mean, Jim Dark Magic is a dumb wizard. He has studied, he has a high int because that's the score he needs when he's a wizard. There's not a lot of book learning there from everything I've ever seen from him when he's played.
Totally.
Also, Jim Dark Magic is actually a bard. Don't at me.
Don't. You know what? I said that he was a sorcerer by accident before because he acts how I think sorcerers, like that archetype of sorcerers. Like in my mind, I was like, oh yeah, no, he is a wizard, obviously. But yeah, just charismatic performer, right? Like,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, mostly illusory magic. Yeah. Chaw forward wizard. It works.
Is that a pod?
I think that's a pod. We're at 54 minutes almost.
Yeah. I think we done made a pod.
Yeah, welcome to Discord Check, where we talk about all the things we've been talking about in the Discord.
Let's see what people are talking about now. I'm going to just jump in real quick and call out some people. Scribbler had a cool lightning storm last night. That sounds really cool. No Tom Lose has weather's turned better for him, so that's good.
Great.
Good. I'm done. I'm sorry.
Maz wants to buy sleep.
So someone please send them sleep.
Yes,
they'll pay top dollar.
Buy Maz all the
we
sleep.
wish Haley better health.
Yes. Thank you for listening to our podcast. We would like to take a minute to say thank you to Vinswept for our intro and outro, Never Stand Alone. And also for Amy T. Falcone for our social branding and our chibi faces. Without her, we would have no faces. If you have enjoyed our podcast, please consider giving us a rating on whatever pod service you currently are doing. I don't know if you can say, 1 second, hey Google, give this pod 5 out of 5 stars. I don't know if that's going to work or not. No, it didn't do anything. Oh, it responded. Okay. But we would really appreciate your input and leave a comment or recommend it to a friend. It would always be nice to have some more ears on this.
Answering your cues from our collective A's, this
was
Insight
Check.
And then we hit stop button.
I do. I'll try and do the outro. I haven't done it in a long time.
Delicious.
Oh man.
Sorry.
That rock tumbler ASMR is just sending me.
Okay, 1 second. I'm smiling too much. That's just a really funny idea of an ASMR. Just a bunch of rocks in a blender.
I'm so relaxed.